Welcome, 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 everyone, to Backstage with Jamie K. Bates. I am so excited you're here listening this week. This is a fun episode. We're here to talk not all things, because that would be impossible in an hour and 20 minutes, but we're here to talk many things, science and God. So this is a nerdy episode, y'all. So you've been warned. I'm about to nerd out. Now you know, continue at your own risk. But Dr. Michael Gillen, he has 3 PhDs in physics, mathematics, and astronomy. He was a physics instructor at Harvard University. He's been a science correspondent for multiple news outlets, Good Morning America, 2020, Nightline, World News Tonight. He has many publications in science news, Psychology Today, the New York Times, the Washington Post. The list goes on and on. He has a podcast out right now called Science Plus God. He is an atheist turned Christian, and he's here to tell us how science led him to God. You are going to love this episode. He makes you just fall in love with God and science all over again. So enjoy this talk with the super smart and very fun Dr. G. Hi, everyone. I have Dr. G with me today, and you are in for a treat because he's a lot of things, which you already heard in the intro. He has a resume a mile long, and you describe yourself, Dr. G, as, you describe your podcast as wanting to bring science and God together.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, please tell us.
No, it's called Science Plus God with Dr. G, and you're absolutely right, Jamie. It's my attempt to explain to people that there's no animus between science and God. People have that misimpression. And so when Caleb, who were the people who came to me to do this podcast, asked me, well, what do you want to call it? Well, I said, let's just call it Science Plus God. Not Science and God, Science Plus, because, I'm a scientist. I love that. I'm a mathematician.
Yep. So you need a plus sign in there.
I need a plus sign. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, man, I love your intro on all your podcasts, which is science and God are not mortal enemies, but good friends. And then I think you also say, and not just good friends, but a great power couple. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. They are, to me, the optimal power couple. I grew up in East Los Angeles, and from the time that I was in the second grade, I had just one love in my life, and that was science.
Yeah.
And I grew up, drinking the Kool-Aid, believing that science was out to get God, science was out to make God obsolete, et cetera, et cetera. You know the whole line, and it really wasn't until I got to grad school when my eyes were open, and we can talk about that at some point in the podcast. But just for now, I'm just so eager to explain to people what I discovered late in life, which is that science and God are not just allies; they're actually the ultimate power couple.
I love that. Being a pastor, I found that, and I'm sure you've ran into this as well, just with your interactions with people, is that 2 of the primary reasons I find that people struggle with faith is suffering and science. I think those are the 2 biggest hangups that people have over, following God and trusting God with their lives. And I'm just so excited for us to dive into the science aspect of it today, because I think that this is so needed, especially in our culture and in our time of history. And that's why I was telling Dr. G earlier before we started recording, everyone, that his podcast has just helped me so much understand that science plus God is possible. And I think I've always, even since I was I remember being a 19-year-old reading Bertrand Russell.
Wow. Really?
Not because I was a Christian. I was just always very curious in, I'm a cerebral person. I like facts. I like, I'm not a huge feeler. I just like everything to make sense.
Yes.
And I had the kind of what you were talking about with your experience, which was science is out to get God and, kill the evolutionists and all the, all this stuff. And I just went seeking and to try and figure out okay, where is all these sides coming from? And obviously we both landed with God. And I'm just so excited to hear from your expertise, which is so widespread. But first of all, tell me about when you started becoming interested in science.
Well, as I
Was
said,
this a childhood thing? Yeah.
it was, as I said a moment ago, I've thought back, and honestly, Jamie, I can trace my interest in science back to when I was in the second grade.
Uh-huh.
All right. Which is interesting because, first of all, except for my father, no one in my family ever went past high school. And in fact, my family has its share of high school dropouts. So I'm just kind of my family, having been born in East Los Angeles, we were poor, but I never thought of ourselves as poor. My dad was a Spanish-speaking Pentecostal preacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and my two grandfathers were Spanish-speaking Pentecostal preachers, and so we spent.
Really?
Yes, we spent. People complain about going to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
Wait, you should become a Pentecostal, and especially be raised in a strict Pentecostal home. And we would go to church, like 7 days a week.
Yeah,
and twice on Sunday. Well, I was going to say twice on Sunday, but it was actually more than that. But so, naturally, everybody just expected that I would become a Pentecostal minister. And I remember one man in the church that we went to came to me one day, and he had one of those picture frames, where there are like four places for four pictures.
Yeah.
And he said, well, here are here's your grandfather, here's your father, and now this will be for you, and then the next one will be for your son. Very presumptuous. And I mean, he meant well. I've no bone to pick.
Right.
But I can tell you, I had then zero interest in that. I don't know. I call myself the black sheep of the family, and I don't know if maybe that upbringing was a turnoff for me, Jamie. I can't tell you that it was. I just didn't think about it. Church just, I went because I had to. I went through the motions, but it was never mine. It was never, and I think that's a problem with a lot of young people today. Their parents take them to church and they kind of go through the motions, but they're not really invested in it. Yes. So for me, the love that I had for science dates back to at least the second grade. And when I say I dreamt of becoming a scientist, I mean that literally. I would dream at night of being a scientist. I saw myself in a white lab coat in a lab setting. And you have to, Jamie, you have to imagine how remarkable that was, because in at least Los Angeles, it's not like, scientists are walking the sidewalks of East LA.
Right. You didn't have a representation really to see.
No, I had never met a scientist in my life.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
There was no history of science in my family. Like I said, very minimal education.
Oh, this is interesting.
So, that dream got me out of East LA, got me to UCLA, then to Cornell, and then ultimately to Harvard and beyond that. So you can imagine the journey that I've been on. And now that I look back on it, and ask the question, well, where in the world did that passion for science come from?
Yeah.
I realized with all my heart that it was God that planted that love of science in my heart. And then you ask, well, why in the world would he do that? Why would he derail you from a family that was full of ministers to become a scientist of all things? Well, look around, like you said in your introduction.
Absolutely. Yep.
For such a time as this, when science has now become the go-to authority for everything, right?
Yep.
And like you said, and I love the way you said that, by the way, Jamie, that suffering and science are two big stumbling blocks. I'd never heard anybody say that. But it's absolutely true. And I am so encouraged to hear you say that. You, a pastor who gets it. And because so many pastors don't. They avoid science. They just
it's a
cross to the other side of the street, avoid science at all costs. They don't want to talk about it. And when they do, it's usually in a very kind of wary or outright hostile
defensive.
tone. And that's not helping. It's not helping the situation.
And it's
so
not
that's why we're losing kids left and right. That's
right. It's not helping people who think.
No. You say you're a thinker. Well, we all are. As far the last time I checked, brains were a standard issue for every human being ever born on the planet, right? Where do you think that brain comes from? Well, the same place where your brain and your body and your spirit come from God. Well, why do you think God would give you a brain
It's good.
unless he expected you to use it. So even if people are listening now, or if someone is listening right now and thinks, well, I'm not really cerebral, I can't really relate, I'm not a thinker. Yeah, you are. Yes, you are.
That's great.
And you should begin thinking about yourself that way, because God gave you a brain. It's that thing between your ears. Use it. The Bible says you should love the Lord your God with everything you have, including your mind. Your mind. It's in the Bible. Read it. Read it. It's there.
I love that. I think you should put Pastor Dr. G, maybe.
Well,
Preacher Dr. G. I'm getting fired up.
Well, you know what?
It's so good. It's so good. And I think some people get so scared by the world out there and the science and everything happening that it's just like, it's too, like, digging into it is scary.
I think it is there. There's a lot of fear there. Look, I have to be honest with you. It's exciting, but it's also intimidating, because we're getting messages from all venues, Facebook, on the email, every a dozen different ways. We're getting messages from people all over the world. The other one from Hong Kong the other day. But these folks, and I call them my fellow travelers, because I see us all as traveling on the same journey of life, trying to figure out this mystery called life. But we're getting questions that are profound, Jamie. And, we may even reach out to you now and again, just because some of these are really people who are hurting deeply. I had one woman who was suicidal, one young woman who said she was an atheist, but a pastor apparently recommended that she listen to my podcast. So she said, pray for me, here I go. And so, my God, it gives me chills to even tell you that. Oh my gosh. And so I'm excited. But I'm also I'm feeling the gravity of the responsibility.
You're in the deep water.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And I pray every day that I don't mess up and that I don't drop the ball, because this is not fun and games. This is people's lives, and you know that as a pastor, you deal with that every day more than even than I do. But for me, this is not just physics and astronomy and math and doing a podcast sitting in front of a microphone. This is getting into people's homes, and the response has been tremendous, young and old, male and female. Gosh, so cool. Jamie, I've already recommended yours to so many people, because this is
it is just, I echo everything, all the good feedback you're getting. The only complaint we all have.
Okay. I know what you're about to say. Go, that it's too short.
It's too short.
Yeah, I know.
I'm always like 5 more minutes, Dr. G. 5 more minutes. Just talk for 5 more minutes. But I also do appreciate the short form, because I can do it on my way to while I drive to church.
Yeah, that's how I feel
get
about
that. So I really appreciate that part of it. But then I also just want you to talk longer. So I just go to the next one.
I like to keep it between 15 and 30 minutes, because what I deal with is some pretty heavy duty stuff, and I don't want to overwhelm people.
That makes sense, because it is, I was just re-listening to, it might be my favorite one. It's the title of your new book, Believing is Seen, that one where you talk about dark matter and how it infers. I want to get into all of this in a minute, but I was listening to it and I was thinking, like, oh my goodness, you just broke that down in 23 minutes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like dark matter, dark energy, 95% of the universe, and how it all infers that God exists in 23 minutes.
Yeah.
So I understand, like, if you were to really unpack it and go like more, I'm sure, scientific wording and all that, people could get, it could be too much, because it is such heavy brain space stuff.
That too, I think so. But also a couple of other things as well I would add to what you just said, and that is, when I was at ABC News, typically early on, Good Morning America would give you maybe 6 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Including, some Q&A in the studio. So the pieces were maybe 4.5, and then you'd get a minute and a half Q&A in the studio, right? And then when I started doing Nightline, the typical Nightline was maybe 9 minutes. And as you know, in those days, and I haven't watched Nightline recently, but with Ted Koppel, what would happen is you'd have one videotaped piece. It was about 9 minutes long. And then he would use that to discuss the subject with 2 guests, and that would flesh out the rest of the half hour.
Wow.
Then when I got to 2020, that was the real bonanza, because there they gave you like upwards of 12 minutes. I had 12 minutes to tell a story.
Did it feel like a Christmas gift to have 12 minutes?
It really was. But then,
Yeah.
but then the kicker was that Peter Jennings really loved my stuff. And so he personally requested that I started doing World News Tonight.
Oh, wow.
And so given this background, I thought, okay, great. World News Tonight. I really like Peter. I still miss him a lot. God rest his soul. And he said, now you understand here at World News, he says, you're going to get a minute and a half at the most. And I said, what? He said, no. We can't make exceptions. A minute and a half.
No.
And I remember once I did a story on the Mars rock. The meteorite from Mars struck the Antarctic, and scientists had looked at it closely, and they got all excited because they thought they had found life, little microscopic evidence of microscopic life. So, wow, that would be a big deal that there's life on Mars, right? Even if it's microscopic, that's a big deal.
Right.
And so I had to fly immediately to Houston, and I remember NASA giving me permission. Get this. I mean, this is amazing.
This is
because I had a reputation. I still have a reputation for being very trustworthy. I don't. When I editorialize, I make it very clear because otherwise, I'm a very straight shooting person. I don't no baloney. You get the straight dope from me, okay?
Yep.
And so as I'm flying, I contacted NASA and I said, "Look, can I actually handle the rock? I want to handle the rock." And they said, "No, Michael, nobody can handle a rock. It's in the lunar. You know, when the lunar rocks had been brought over years earlier, they were locked away in this safe." In a hermetically sealed safe.
Sure,
and this is where the Mars rock was, right?
What?
So I said, well, just go up the pipeline. I said, because I know the people at NASA, the leadership really like me. So sure enough, they let me say, they called me back and said, okay, man, I can't believe this, but you're going to be the only reporter because reporters are flocking from all over the world. No.
Kidding me.
No, the reporters are flocking all over the world to Houston to tell the story, right? But you're going to be allowed to touch the rock. You're the only one. So I get there, and
I'm on the edge of my seat right now.
Now, listen, just a funny aside. So I get there, and they said, okay, well, you have to take what they call an air shower because you have to put on the booties and you have to put on
to just touch the rock.
Well, you have to go inside a very
that space.
Hermetically sealed space, and before you can get in there, you have to be.
My gosh.
Given an air shower. So jets of air hit you. But before you do that, even you have to put on a gown, like the hood, the booties, the gloves. Now get this. So the camera is rolling, recording all this, right? This is like a chance of a lifetime.
Right.
And the guy says to me, a NASA guy says, no, you got to take off your ring. I had my wedding ring on.
Oh.
I said, well, okay. And wouldn't you know, I couldn't take the sucker off.
No.
Because it's tight. Even now, I'm tugging on it. It's tight.
No.
And I've got a knuckle that, and the camera's rolling, and the cameraman and my producers said, take the ring off already. I'm trying. So finally, and I'm holding up the show. I mean, the NASA people are waiting. You're going to get to touch the rock.
The rock is waiting.
Take the ring off already, right? So finally, out of desperation, because I'm feeling the heat, I literally spit on the ring and it slips right off. I know it sounds gross. They edited that out. The reason I'm telling you this is
man.
So after all this, I get to touch the rock. We get it all on camera. I call Peter.
Goodness.
I said, Peter, you won't believe it. I got to touch the Mars rock. And it was going to be on that evening's news. It was a big headline story. I said, Peter, I got to touch the rock. I got great footage. I said, can I please have more than a minute and a half? A minute and a half is not enough. It can't do it. And he says, all right, look, I can get you a minute 45, and that's it. I swear to God.
He gave you 15 seconds after a Mars rock touching.
And he thought that was like a gift. I mean, from God. So I guess early on, I acquired the discipline to do it quickly. Yeah, so 15 to 30 minutes, I think, is a good thing.
That's so great. Well, and honestly, you really do it so well. Like so brilliantly. Like it's honestly, you're clearly a professional.
Well,
for
it's
how well
years.
you're able to break those things down and so
Thank you,
quickly.
Jamie.
But
Thank you.
I'll definitely take more episodes though. I haven't listened to the Do Dogs Go to Heaven one yet. That one's I think the only one I haven't listened to yet.
Haven't you heard?
The
which one?
animals. If the animal
okay,
souls. So
okay.
don't spoil that one for me.
No,
yet,
I won't tell you anything about it. No, not at all.
Okay, so let's go back to Cornell. So you go for your PhD in math, physics, and astronomy. Is that right?
I didn't. I went to Cornell to become an experimental high energy physicist, which was a kind of a modern term for basically nuclear physics, but I wanted to work in the lab. Okay. But what
you wanted to be in the trenches.
I wanted to be in the trenches. Remember I told you that in the second grade, I literally dreamed of myself in a lab setting with a lab coat?
Yes. Yep.
And so when I got to Cornell, you can imagine, I felt like, wow, I had hit the jackpot.
Oh, yeah.
This poor little kid, I'm Mexican, Spanish, Cuban, and Austrian. So, I'm this Hispanic little kid from East LA. And I just hit the lottery. I'm at Cornell University, an Ivy League university, one of the top rated in the world for experimental high energy physics, and it has its own synchrotron. So I'm thinking, this is it, man. And so what happened though was that, and I won't get into all the details, but at that time, what was happening in experimental physics was that the experimental groups were getting bigger and bigger. And so I found myself being a kind of a cog in the wheel. And I was assigned, because we were building this humongous experiment that was going to go to CERN, which was big atom smasher in Switzerland. And it was huge. I mean, the thing, you could fill a warehouse. And my part of it, I was assigned the plumbing. I was to do all the plumbing, the copper plumbing. Can you imagine? I go to Cornell to become a scientist, and I'm assigned to do the copper plumbing of this. Okay, admittedly, it was going to be a very cutting edge experiment, and the equipment had to be just right. But I months into this, and I still know how to plumb copper because of that, and that's great.
Wow.
But after some months of that, I thought, no, this is not. I want to learn physics. I want to get my teeth into this. And I had friends in the theoretical end, and they got to sit at a desk and just think all day. And I said, that's what I want. I just want permission to just
think.
Wow. Think all day, And so, again, to make a long story short, I went to my thesis chairman and I explained the situation. He said, well, transferring from experimental to theoretical is not a small thing. That's a very big deal. I said, really? He said, yeah, you're going to have to get permission from Professor Beta. Well, we all were in fear of Professor Hans Bethe. Why? Because he was a Nobel Prize winning physicist who got the Nobel Prize for explaining why the sun shines. Okay. Yeah, he's the guy. If you ever wondered, what are the physics of the sun? Well, he got it. And he was also the head of the Manhattan theoretical division that came up with the first atom bomb. So he was this legendary, iconic figure. Oh my gosh, yeah. And he had this thick German accent, and he was on the very top floor of the Lab of Nuclear Studies, the main building where I was in.
Oh my gosh.
So, here I go with shaky knees up to the top floor, and I begged, I won't get into it. It's a great story, but in the end, I got his permission, but he said it was conditional. He said, look, and again, a picture of very thick German accent. He said, look, I will allow you to make the transition, but you have to take 2 semesters of general relativity. And we had a young hotshot professor coming to us from Caltech, Saul Chukalski. I'll never forget Saul. He was a young hotshot, expert in general relativity. And Beta said to me, you take Saul's course for 2 semesters for an entire year. If you do well, you'll be allowed to become a theoretical physicist. So I did. I passed. I did great. I loved general relativity, and I became a theoretical physicist. But then the subject that really interested me was galaxies. And so I started having to teach myself galaxies. And so I went back to my chairman and I said, I really need to learn a whole lot of astronomy. Physics isn't enough, And so he said, he just kind of shook his head and he's like, oh gosh, are you kidding me? Oh my, okay. All right. So then we had to petition for that, and I got permission for that. And then after a while I said, man, this thesis is becoming really mathematical because I had an idea to use equations that were normally in kinetic theory. I won't get into it, but we call them the BBGKY equations, and we use them typically to describe the behavior of a gas of many particles. And I said, I'm gonna use the BBGKY equations to explain galaxies. And I had a whole new theory for it. And so I went back to my chairman and I said, you know what? I need a whole lot more math. So I ended up earning the equivalent of 3 PhDs in math, physics, and astronomy. And I had offices in all 3 departments, in the physics department, the astronomy department, and the math department. Crazy.
So during this time, because I know you talk about it a lot on your podcast, but I want my listeners to really hear your journey through. I know you practiced a lot of different religions during this time and landed on atheism. So how did that all transpire?
No, I started with atheism because...
Oh, you started with atheism. Okay, can you tell me that journey?
Yeah, because remember in East LA, even though, I went to church because my parents were into Pentecostalism and all this sort of thing, and my dad was a minister and my grandfather was a minister, both my grandfathers. When you're a kid, you don't have a choice. And so, but in my heart of hearts, I was always in love with science. And so I always had this kind of attachment to the idea that the universe was kind of this kind of cold-hearted, bloodless machine that operated on very strict rules, and there was just no place for God in that whole worldview. And so by the time I went to Cornell, I was a dyed-in-the-wool atheist. And in fact, in one of my episodes, in one of my journeys, I call them, I describe how I really became a scientific monk. I lived, breathed, ate, slept. Science. I mean, that was my whole world. I had no social life. I didn't want a social life. I slept for 3 hours a day. I was in the lab or in the classroom the rest of the time. And so really, that's why I say I was an atheist scientific monk. I was in love with science, and God just wasn't even on the radar. I didn't have a bone to pick with God. He just wasn't part of my worldview or my world. And, but one day, I think it was about maybe 2 years into my studies. So I was already heavily into the theoretical studies and physics, math, and astronomy. My eyes were being opened to just how extraordinary the universe was. I mean, I always knew it was extraordinary. You only have to look around you, and it's beautiful, right? And but it's like, let me put it to you like this. It's like a TV set. I've spent all my life on TV, in front of a TV camera. And when you walk into a studio, it's nothing like what it looks like on TV. When you look like it, when you see something on TV, like if you take a Good Morning America set, okay, it looks glamorous, it's all beautiful and all that. And but when you actually step into the studio, you realize it's just a facade. It's just like plywood that's been painted, and then you throw some spotlights on it, maybe some glitter, and so there was always the possibility in my mind that even though the universe looked fantastic outwardly, I mean, if you just look at it, maybe it would end up being like a TV set, that if you started digging deep into it, that you would realize, on the inside, it's not so great. It's not so spectacular. But I was actually discovering just the opposite, that the more I looked at it on either on the microscopic level, on the macroscopic, on the astronomical level, it really was extraordinary. And in fact, more extraordinary than it appears to the naked eye. It's actually one of those situations where it doesn't let you down. It actually exceeds your expectations.
Oh, yeah.
And so 2 years in or so, I started thinking, okay, well, how did the universe get to be so spectacular? And it was not a religious question. It was just an intellectual question. I'm a scientific monk asking a legitimate intellectual question. How did this amazing universe come to be so amazing? That demanded an explanation. And I knew, science offered me an answer in the form of cosmology, typically the Big Bang theory, the inflation theory, get into string theory and all the rest of that. And, I bought into that for a long while, and there's a lot of beauty there, and there's a lot, there is a lot to love. The mathematics is just quite stunning. But the more I started learning about all those subjects in class, I realized that they weren't answering all my questions. There were huge holes and they had real defects. They still do.
And what were
That's
the
not
holes
putting
that
them
were
down.
what were the holes that were going through your mind?
Well, the whole idea, let's just take the Big Bang for starters. And by the way, when I say Big Bang, this is not your grandfather's Big Bang.
Totally.
This is not the Big Bang that was referred to back in the 1940s. It's become much more sophisticated, but I'm going to still call it the Big Bang because that's how people. It's the idea that
that's a
somehow,
good clarification, though. Yeah,
exactly. It's just the general idea that somehow the universe had a definite beginning. It started somehow spontaneously on its own. Okay. And so that naturally raised the question, okay, well, what started it? I mean, you say you started it on your own. And then one of the popular ideas even to this day is, well, if you include the laws of physics in the quantum vacuum, then you can actually do the mathematics, and it suggests that the universe will create itself. Okay. So it's a very compelling idea. So picture this, that the cosmology was telling me, all right, you start with a quantum vacuum, which is nothing, but really something. So already you got problems, because what does that mean? Okay, but let's table that problem for a moment. How can something be nothing? It's either one or the other, but you're asked to believe that it's both at the same time. But now you say, well, but if the quantum vacuum includes the laws of physics, so now you're stuffing more into the so-called empty piñata, right? Because the quantum vacuum is like, you're being told it's really like an empty piñata, but if you break it open, it has the contents of a universe in it. So you figure that out, right? Is that mind-boggling or what?
Yeah.
But,
wow.
So now you add the laws of physics into the quantum vacuum, which is supposedly nothing, and that will get you a universe that creates itself. That's the idea that still actually is quite popular today. So I'm sitting in my chair at Cornell, and I'm thinking, I'm the scientific monk, so totally dyed-in-the-wool intellectual.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, wait, I don't buy that, because where did the laws of physics come from?
You're not even thinking about God. You're just
this is just
hypothesizing. Yeah.
This is just a total intellectual exercise. So I'm thinking, well, okay, but where number one, where did the quantum vacuum come from? And then where did the laws of physics come from that get you a spontaneously created universe? And so they were issues like that. And then you get into string theory, and it even gets worse when you get into string theory. So I'm just sitting, again, I'm at my desk. Picture this scientific monk. Picture me with big hair. I mean, I had big curly hair, tight jeans, although I look back now and I'm like, I was ahead of my time, because tight jeans are back.
That's the thing now, right?
Yeah, that's the thing now, right? I didn't know it. I was just a scientific monk, the ultimate nerd. And so I'm sitting in my office and thinking physics 23 hours a day, or 24 minus 21 hours a day. I'm just thinking physics. That's all I'm doing. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. And then I remember one of my professors at Cornell was Carl Sagan, who's the famous astronomer.
You studied under Carl Sagan?
Yes, I took classes from him and Frank Drake, both of whom were the founders of exobiology. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Yes.
I took courses.
I have more questions about that for you later, too.
Yeah. So Drake and Sagan were the founders of SETI. Really Frank, but Frank was very soft-spoken. He's still alive. Carl isn't. But Carl was very bombastic, and I loved him, and he was getting very famous at the time. He was going on the Tonight Show, and I just remember him always talk. He's a kind of a secular Jew, so he wasn't a religious man. There's some question about whether he was an agnostic or an atheist, but in any case, he always loved to talk about the Vedas. So if he would be on the Tonight Show and they would ask him, well, what do you believe? Do you have any religion or whatever? Well, he started talking about the Vedas.
And that's Hinduism? Is that right?
What's that?
Is that Hinduism?
Well, I didn't know that.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
But that was the days before Google. So here I am, this monk, trying to figure out how did the universe begin? How did it become so amazing? And so I'm just flashing on somebody I really respect and admire, Carl Sagan, talking about the Vedas. So I'm thinking, well, what the heck is this Vedas that keeps talking about? So I went to Olin Library, which was the graduate student library on campus. Again, this is before Google. And I went in there, and Vedas, it's the sacred literature of the Hindu religion. And so I thought that was interesting that an astronomer of his caliber would have any interest in this sacred literature of Hinduism.
Interesting.
So I thought, well, what the heck? If it's good enough for Sagan, I'm going to
It's
look
good
into
enough
it.
for
And
me.
so,
Right.
it's good enough for me, right? And so I did
Wow.
what I always do, Jamie. And so I dove in with both feet and both hands. I never do anything halfway. And so I just, there were for months and maybe even for more than a year, I just immersed myself in Hinduism, and I found aspects of it quite fascinating.
Yeah.
And then when a friend of mine got wind of the fact that I was looking into Hinduism, he says, well, why don't you check this out? And he gave me a copy of the I Ching, which is all about Chinese mysticism. And so I started going there, and then I started reading Hermann Hesse, whose characters I liked because they were always intellectual. All his, Gold Moon and Narcissus and Beneath the Wheel and all his great novels, Hermann Hesse, to this day, I love his novels. All his protagonists were always intellectuals, but they were on a spiritual journey.
And
so at that point,
okay.
I identified.
So you're,
I'm like,
okay.
wow,
I see exactly what's going on here. Totally. Yep.
You see?
Yep. You can be both. Yep. Yeah.
So then,
and it's coming to you. Yeah. This is great.
So then this was like, I became a little bit excited because this was new for me. This was like my journey. This was not my parents' journey. This was my journey. Yeah. And I was approaching it as an intellectual, and I got Hinduism, Chinese mysticism, and Confucianism. And then I looked into Buddhism, and then Islam. And then my thesis advisor, Richard Lieboff, was Jewish. And so he started getting wind of my getting into all this stuff. And he says, look, hey, come to Shabbat services with me on Friday nights. So he would take me to Shabbat services on Friday night, and then he would take me home for a little Onyx Shabbat afterwards with like a little snack. And he would offer me his mother's chopped chicken liver. And this is a funny story, just as an aside. So I said, Richard, no, I don't. My mother always tried to fatten me up when I was a kid with liver. I hate the stuff. I don't want it. No, he says, no. This is my mom's recipe. You got to really try it. Put a little on a cracker and all this. And it's got onions and stuff like that. I said, no. He kept pestering me on Friday nights. Finally, I gave in. I said, okay, God, Ritter, just put a little on a cracker. I'll try it, but then that's it. Okay. I don't want to hear from you anymore about chopped chicken liver. So I tasted it and I loved it. So I say to myself that during my spiritual quest, I learned to love chopped chicken liver. Okay. This was one of the highlights of my spiritual quest. But there was like no stopping me. There was like no stopping because now this whole new world of spiritual truths were opening up to me. And then the fateful day happened, and that was
tell me about that day.
Well, it was Valentine's Day, and I came home. Typical. It was about 3 a.m, and I was coming home from my lab, and I didn't even know, by the way, what day. My lab was in the basement, so I had no windows. I didn't know if it was day or night. It was weekday, weekend. It made no difference to me. I was just in there. That was my man cave. And so I opened the door to my little dorm room there in Sage Hall. And this time I heard a scraping sound, underneath the door. So I looked down and I see a white envelope with my name on it. This had never happened to me before. So I bend down, I pick up the envelope, close the door. I open the envelope standing up, and I take it out, and it's a Valentine's Day card. And I thought to myself, oh, okay, well, I didn't even know it was Valentine's Day. It was just like meant nothing to me whatsoever.
Right.
And technically it really was not Valentine's Day because it was 3 a.m. the following day.
Okay,
but I open it up and it's signed by Laurel. And I said, oh, Laurel. Okay, I had a co-ed in my physics class 2 years earlier named Laurel. It was a class we called Physics for Poets. So it was a physics class for kids who were not majoring in science, but they had to take a physics class in order to graduate. So we called it Physics for Poets. And so I track her down to thank her, and I'm just like completely mystified. So I was stealing time away from the lab to spend with Laurel. And one of the things I loved about her then as now is that she was a really smart woman. I mean, she was also asking deep questions. She was raised as a Catholic. Her mom became very new agey, would take her to all these kind of new age camps, retreats. And so I didn't realize it, but Laurel was herself on a kind of a spiritual journey looking for answers. And she told me that she had gone to a priest on campus asking questions about Christianity and Catholicism. And he just handed her a catechism and said, your answers are all in here. And she just wasn't satisfied. So she resonated with my questioning, my journey.
Yeah.
And so one day she asks me, I was telling her I've been to Hinduism and Buddhism and Confucianism. I was even into transcendental meditation. It was a big thing in those days, right? TMI, transcendental
It's made a comeback
meditation.
too, yeah.
Yeah, it's coming back. The guru would make the rounds of the college campuses. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, I remember him. And he promised that if you became a devotee of TMI, you could actually levitate, which really attracted me because I'm thinking as a physicist, wow, I can defy gravity. And that would be a really cool thing. So I'm telling Laurel
that will definitely give me the Nobel Prize,
right? Yeah, that would definitely. If I could pull that off, that would be quite a scientific publication. There's my Nobel Prize.
Yeah,
but
there
anyway,
it is. Yep.
So I'm telling Laurel all this, and she's listening, and so she's like, at some point, one night, under the stars, she says to me, "Well, what about the Bible? Have you ever read the Bible? You said you read the Quran. You've read you do this and that and all this." And I looked at her like she had two heads. I said, "No, why would I?" I said, "Number one, I grew up
been there, done that,
in a Christian home. And so there's nothing there that I think is new or different for me. I can't see what it could possibly teach me that I haven't already heard a million times from my parents and people in church. And number two, I said, my impression is that people who read the Bible hate science with a passion. So why would I want to read a book that is loved by people who hate the very thing that I love the most?
You love the most.
Science.
Yep.
So it just made no sense to me. And she said, well, okay. And she kind of let it go. And then it was a little short time later. She says, I've been thinking about it. She says, I've never read the Bible either. She said, I'll make a deal with you. If you read it, I'll read it with you. Let's read it together. And I wasn't as stupid as I looked. And I thought about it. I thought, well, I could spend a little more time with this really pretty girl.
Her, yeah.
And so that's really the motivation. And so we started reading the Bible together. And you know what? It took us 2 years because we had so many questions. It took us 2 years. And we entered every question we had in a spiral notebook.
Oh, wow.
And because at some point I said, Laurel, we keep talking, asking questions like we say, well, doesn't this contradict what we read like 2 weeks ago? And I said, if we keep going this way, we're never going to finish this book. I said, so let's just write the question down. We'll come back to it.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what we did. And we filled up a spiral bound notebook with our questions, but we ended up reading it. And what really sold me, what really got me thinking, the kind of the moment where the bulb went off for me was when we finished the Old Testament. And I'll never forget the day we began the New Testament. We were kind of excited. We're like, okay, wow, we finished the Old Testament. That's a milestone. We patted ourselves on the back. Let's see what the New Testament has to tell us. So we turned the page, and I'll never forget it, Jamie. It was like had been in a darkened theater, and somebody suddenly turned on the house lights. Yeah. And it went from a God who was angry at us, where we had messed up time and again, and he'd forgiven us, but then we'd messed up again and all this. And it was just an angry narrative. It was a depressing narrative. And it didn't end well. I mean, it was just, it was a story with not a happy ending. And but as we started reading the New Testament, it's like, whoa, what happened? I mean, this is like, in the beginning, this is a different...
Polar opposites, yep.
Very much so. But really what fascinated me was the way Jesus spoke. And again, I don't know if we have time in this conversation, but what immediately when he started saying, the last shall be first, and don't just love your enemies, don't just love your friends, love your enemies. And if they ask you for a coat, shirt, give them your coat also. And I'm like, you have to die in order to live. And it's like, whoa, this is just like gibberish, right? To most people, but not to me, because it immediately reminded me of the language of quantum mechanics in its kind of contradictory nature. Remember I told you a moment ago that a quantum vacuum is nothing but everything? Well, suddenly God is saying the last shall be first. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. He's speaking the language of quantum mechanics. He's speaking my language. This dude is my kind of guy. And so immediately as a scientific
this is
monk,
so touching. Oh my gosh.
I connected with Jesus, and I'm like, I got to know more about this guy, because he sounds nothing like Buddha. He sounds nothing like Muhammad. He sounds nothing like any of the other religious figures that I had studied and taken
Wow.
seriously. And I don't mean to diminish them. I
Sure.
learned something precious from each religion.
Yeah.
But this was a whole different ball game. And so for me, it ended up being a game changer. And eventually, I didn't
Wow.
like fall on my knees because I'm not that type of guy. But it just encouraged me to dive deeper and deeper and deeper. And I read and reread the Bible. And little by little, I just began to see, oh my God, this is not just an accidental coincidence. There is a real synergy between the Bible and science. And that's why I say in my podcast today that science and God aren't just allies. They are the ultimate power couple. I mean that. And I can back it up with what I have to say, right?
Yes.
With some real meaty stuff. And so that's
because you've given your whole life to it from then on,
I've given my whole life.
Yeah.
From then on, then I said, you know what? At some point, I dropped the other shoe and I said, I have enough evidence, more than enough evidence here because I'm evidence driven. I have way more evidence here now to become a Christian. And I mean, to become a real Christian, somebody going into the faith with his eyes wide open, who's asked all the tough questions. And that's why when I go into visit college campuses now, I tell the kids, look, guys, and my favorite part of the presentations are the Q&A from the kids. I said, give me your best stuff. Because at Harvard, I would tell my kids, ask me the toughest question you can imagine, because I'm going to grade you not only how well you did on your homework or on your test, I'm going to grade you on how tough the questions are. Don't give me the mamby-pamby questions. Hit me with your good stuff. And I tell that to kids now, the atheist kids, the agnostic kids, the Buddhist kids, whoever come, the Muslim kids. I say that with all the love in my heart. I say to them, just please, this is your opportunity because I'm going to be on your campus for just this evening. And then I don't know if I'll ever be back. But this is your chance. Give me your best questions. Hit me with your toughest questions, because I can almost guarantee you that whatever question you can imagine, I have already asked.
You've already
myself.
had. Yep.
I mean, come on, I've spent my whole life asking questions, and I still do. I haven't stopped. I still do. I still ask the tough questions.
So good. What are some of the primary reasons you hear from, maybe on college campuses or just through other avenues, that people are really struggling to grasp between science and God?
Because I'll tell you, one of the big things is that Christianity has acquired this reputation for being anti-scientific. Yeah. I mean, it's true. I'm working on a podcast right now. I'll give your listeners a little sneak preview. Yay! But I'm working on a journey. I don't call them podcasts because I really do feel like each podcast is a journey. Yeah, and it's a journey we're taking together, right, Jamie? Yeah, when you're listening to my podcast, you and I are taking this journey together. We're asking some tough questions. We're asking, what does the Bible have to say about it? What does science have to say about it? And what can we conclude then? But I'm working on a journey right now that has to do with the origins of the scientific method. And it's amazing how much research is out there where people are really hard put to believe that Christianity had anything to do with the beginnings of the scientific method. And the reasons they give.
Can you explain what the scientific method is?
Yes. In a nutshell, there's an argument about, is there really a hard and fast method? Some people say it has 3 steps, 4 steps, 5 steps, 8 steps, 10 steps. Okay. All that aside, the scientific method is really a method. It's a systematic way of asking and answering questions in a reliable fashion. Okay. So the scientific method basically says you ask a question like, okay, where did the laws of nature come from? So then you've asked a question, right? Now you have to think of an experiment that puts that question to the test, where you can actually make a prediction that says, okay, I believe the laws of nature, are eternal. All right. Well, let's put that hypothesis to the test. Let's do an experiment, get the data, see if it lines up with a hypothesis. If it does, fantastic, publish. If it doesn't, then you have to tweak your hypothesis according to the data, and then you can still publish. Okay, so and you do that over and over and over again. Okay. That's science. That's a never-ending process of questioning and answering. Okay,
gotcha. Okay.
So we know that the modern scientific method, the scientific method everybody kind of talks about today, originated in the medieval times in Europe. Okay, it's not to say that that's the only place it arose, and this is where the debate comes, and I'll deal with all of this in the journey. But there is such pushback among intellectual scholars today to say that Christians had anything to do with it, when in fact Christians had everything to do with it.
Really?
And the reason, if you look at the research, the reasons they're giving this is because, no, don't you know Christians are anti-science. How could they possibly have invented the scientific method? Look at them today. They're against this, they're against that, they're against science. And all. So you have to ask yourself the question, how did Christianity acquire this abysmal reputation?
View of it. Yeah,
it's damaging. And the kids out there in these college campuses that I visit, I'm talking the big Arizona State, Michigan, University of Maryland. I'm talking big name universities. They all have this impression that Christianity is totally against science. So how in the world, Dr. G, can you come on campus and tell us with a straight face that science and God are the ultimate power couple? It just rattles their worldview. Right. And that's what I want to do. I want to go on their campus and rock their worldview. And that's exactly what I do. So I have to patiently kind of just unpack the myth that Christians are against science. But here's how that reputation came about, I think, because I've thought long and hard about it. Because it really is a huge problem right now in the church. Although many pastors don't recognize it, and they're deaf, dumb, and blind, and you're one of the few enlightened ones. So God bless you, Jamie.
Dr.
Really,
G.
I mean that sincerely, because sometimes I get a little bit depressed. I get a little bit discouraged that pastors are just not taking this subject on. So how did Christianity get this reputation? Here's what I think happened. Along the way, very vocal scientists, many of whom were atheists, started being given, they were given a platform where they started telling people that science was out to get God, that science was all about replacing God to explain what we see in nature, and that the Bible was just a book of fables.
So they were kind of evangelizing this thought.
Absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
But the thing is, the media allows them.
Yeah.
I saw it at ABC. I see it today. I do stuff for Fox News. I see it. The media, the major media, just these scientists are invited on, and they're given this free platform, and they pontificate. They evangelize. And the message to them is the same over and over and over. They hammer away the same message. Science is all about now. Science got us to the moon. Science found a cure for polio. Science, invented the computer. Science invented the internet. Science is now allowing the blind to see with retinal implants. Science is allowing the lame to walk with exoskeleton, with computer-driven exoskeletons, and on and on and on. Jesus is like this remote figure. He's not the miracle maker anymore in these kids' world. In these kids' world, science is the miracle worker. Science has replaced Bible and God. Okay, so that's the message that these atheist scientists are pounding every day, and these kids are just soaking it up like mother's milk. Okay, so so how do you think Christians react when they hear that message? Of course, they're upset. They're upset by that. They're like, wait a minute.
And now we start to hate science because it's coming for us.
Thank you. Bingo. That's it. So we react by saying, well, you know what? Then we hate science.
You do suck. Science,
If science is out to get us, we're out to get science.
That makes
and
so
all of a
much
sudden,
sense.
Christians are playing right into the narrative. Instead of saying this, this is what Christians should be saying. This is what Christians should be saying. They should be saying, you know what? You're lying. You're an atheist. You're a scientist, but you're also an atheist, and you're trying to use science to defend your atheism. The fact is, science is neutral on the subject of God. Science is Switzerland. It neither says God exists nor does it say that it doesn't exist.
Oh,
It
okay,
is absolutely neutral. It does not have the power to adjudicate that question. Okay, that's what Christians should be saying. Don't take it out on science that you're buying into the baloney from an atheist scientist. You see? That's why.
This is so good. Wow.
That's why my podcast, you see, when Caleb approached me, I said yes for two reasons. One was timeless and one was timely. The timeless reason I said yes was because I have devoted my entire life to truth and to the author of truth now, who I believe is the God described in the Bible, okay? That's the timeless reason I said yes, because I want to leave something behind that survives me. Long after I'm gone, people will be listening and watching these podcasts, right? But then there was a timely reason, because I look around and you can become so discouraged at the hostility towards Christianity, right? And I think to myself, was it a coincidence that God placed in the heart of a Hispanic little boy in East LA so many years ago a passion for science, and then used that love of science? Think about this, to open his eyes to God.
Right. It led you right to him. Yep. Oh.
Science was the missionary in my life. Science is the one who met me where I was living in that basement lab and opened my eyes to the existence of God, the God in the Bible. So I owe everything to science, because God used science to bring me to him. If you're somebody who is outside and doesn't even know what to believe, that I want to offer you a rational alternative. I want to offer you something that you can base your life on, not just believe in, but you can base your entire life on. I wake up in the morning, I just ask God, just give me the courage and the strength and the wisdom to do everything I can today, do my little part to help people understand that science is not the enemy of Christianity. Science is not the enemy of the Bible. Science is not the enemy of God. Please listen to me. It's a big lie perpetrated by people who want to make you believe that lie every day in the media. So that's why talking to you, a pastor who gets it, for me, makes all my hard work worth it, because I know people will listen to your podcast. They trust you. They respect you. You've dedicated your life to truth and to the author of truth. And so I'm just praying that people will help spread the word, and more people will be lifted really from the darkness of indecision, the darkness of believing that somehow God is obsolete. The Bible is a book of fables. It isn't. It is one of the most profound books ever given to humanity. But you have to spend time with it. You can't just buy into the lies about it. And I have spent my life studying it. And you know what? Every time I crack it open, oh my gosh, Jamie, I see something new.
You start doing math.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, that's my story.
That's so good, Dr. G. That's so, so good. And I just think, like, faith can be so intimidating for people who are hung up on exactly what you just described. And if we can break that wall down and do science plus God is the journeys we could take in our faiths. And I mean, it's just because so often I think too, like, Big C Church can just be so focused on, like, feelings, and I love that God, he speaks through emotions, and I understand that, and I like it, but it's, I love what you said in one of your podcasts. I think you said, intellectualism led me to Christianity. And I love that, because a lot of people, it's like, well, I had a good feeling. Well, that always goes away eventually, and it can return. But I love that, like, your brain got you there. And for some people probably don't care about that, but a lot of people are like you. And you are doing such important work. And I just honor you for it. Okay. Can I ask you some science questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Make them
because
tough. Make them tough.
I took some that I always. Okay, you're going to score my podcast on how hard the questions are. Well, you already have answered these on your podcast, but it's what I want. It's what I want some of my listeners to hear. Proving that God exists. I love how that famous atheist Bertrand Russell. I think he's the one that said, like, if I get to heaven and God, damns me or whatever, I'll just tell him you never gave me enough evidence, right? And I love that you were the exact opposite. You were like, I have more than enough evidence. I have too much. So when it comes to proving, right? Can you talk about that? That maybe some of the believing is seen and inferring based on the universe. I just love that.
Okay, first thing is, and I had a mother message me some weeks ago that said she had a daughter who would not believe in God unless she had proof. Okay, so this concept of proof comes up all the time. So I just want your listener to please lean forward and listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, but it's a key to everything. There are very few things that we can prove. If by proof you mean beyond any doubt. And science is not in the business of proving anything. In fact, science cannot prove anything. And one of the great quotes that I love to share with people is from Einstein, who said, and remember he had dogs in the fight when he was trying to get scientists to believe in his theories of relativity, for special relativity, then general relativity, and they gave him a hard time. He said to them, no amount of experimentation can ever prove me right. Listen to that sentence. I'm going to say it again.
Wow. Yeah.
No amount of experimentation can ever prove me right.
Wow.
Now, I could stop there, but he added one more sentence. He said, a single experiment can prove me wrong.
Oh.
Okay? Wow.
So
that in a nutshell is what I want my fellow traveler to understand. And that is that science is not in the business of proving. It doesn't have the power to prove anything, just as Einstein indicated. Why? Because a single experiment can always prove you wrong. So science can't prove anything, but it can disprove something. So for example, if you make the statement, all ravens are black, sounds like a reasonable statement, but can you ever prove it? Somebody can say to you, well, prove it. I can't. I can't prove it scientifically. Why? Because one day somebody could discover an albino raven, right? So a white raven. So that I need your listener to understand that first and foremost. So what I encourage my fellow travelers to do is, can you please just right now take the word prove and throw it out the window?
It's great.
Do not use the word prove, please.
Great.
People ban that it's been scientifically proven. No, it's not. Here's the best science can ever do, okay? The best science can ever do, or anybody can ever do, is to make a statement like all ravens are black, okay? And then go searching for evidence for or against the hypothesis. Remember I said a moment ago that essential to the scientific method is you make a statement, which is your hypothesis. Then you design an experiment to put that hypothesis to the test. Does it pass the test? Great. If it does. If it doesn't, then you have to tweak your hypothesis to accommodate the new information, right? That's a scientific method in a nutshell. And you rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. All right. So the best you can do in science is to make a statement like all ravens are black, and then go out and look at the evidence. What does the evidence tell you? Does the evidence tell you that that hypothesis is true? In other words, can you make the claim after you've looked at the evidence that, yes, I've looked at the evidence, I've looked at all the evidence, I've looked all over the earth, and all the evidence is consistent. Listen to the word, is consistent with the statement, all ravens are black. That's a very different thing to say.
It is
the evidence proves that all ravens are black. It just simply says all the evidence that I'm aware of is consistent with the statement. Now, let's take this to God.
Great.
I make the statement, God exists. Okay? It's just like the statement I made a minute ago about ravens. I'm making the statement, God exists. Now, can I scientifically prove it? No, I just explained to you. Science does not have the power. Get over it. Stop it. Okay? Take that word and throw it out for the rest of your life. I don't want to hear you say it. You'll get an F. You'll get an F from me.
Yes,
right?
Dr. G. Yes, Dr. G.
Right. So what can you say, though, as a Christian?
This is great.
What can you say? What's the best thing you can say as a Christian? Here's what you can say and what you should say. When I look at all the evidence, not just in nature, but you have to include the Bible, because the Bible is there in black and white. You can't just discount it. It's part of the evidence base. Okay, along with all the other literature ever created or ever presented to the human species. All right. So you can say this. I have looked at all the evidence. And can you say the evidence is consistent with the statement God exists? Or is the evidence inconsistent with the statement God exists? Okay? So when somebody says to you, what I'm saying to you right now, what I'm saying to your listener, what I'm saying to my fellow traveler on Science Plus God is this. I am Dr. Michael Gillen, and I have spent decades studying this statement, God exists. And I have spent all that time, and I continue spending all my time looking at the evidence available to us. And I am telling you, point blank, without reservation, without blinking, all the evidence out there in nature and in the literature is completely consistent with the statement, God exists. It's more than even consistent. It's incredibly consistent. It's amazingly consistent.
Like, taking off of this thought, you're believing, or this believing is seen concept, where you talk about the 95% of the universe thing, and how that, could you touch on that really quickly?
Yes, real quick.
On how that infers,
because, we all celebrate Missouri as the show me state, right? We all kind of celebrate the good old fashioned skepticism, and skepticism is something really good. And I encourage people to be skeptical, but there's a difference between being skeptical and becoming cynical.
Right.
If skepticism
it's a great distinction.
goes too far, right? But absolutely, always be in a state of skepticism. Even the Bible says, test the spirits. Well, it's urging you to be skeptical about the spirits. Well, I'm urging you to be skeptical about everything, including what I'm telling you. Don't take everything I'm saying. Go do your own homework and verify what I'm saying. You'll find out that what I'm telling you is true. I have zero worries about that. Now, so for a long time, like most people, I lived by the motto, seeing is believing. Show me, and it sounds really good. Like, yes, seeing is believing. I'm not going to believe it until I see it. Like that woman's daughter. I'm not going to believe it until God, give me proof. And then I know when I was younger, I became an amateur magician, and I realized, you know what, I can actually trick you into seeing something that's really not true. So I already had an inkling that there were things wrong with that mantra, seeing is believing, because I can make you believe you see something that's not really there, and I can make you believe something that's not true. Okay, I can make you can look at me and you can see me make an egg disappear, and so you're going to believe that I made that egg disappear. Okay, so that it fails there, but it really wasn't until I got deep into my spiritual journey that I was studying astronomy and all this sort of thing, and I remember studying one day about the fact that there is what we now believe to be dark energy. I won't get into the details of it. I have a podcast on it. And then not only dark energy, but also dark mass. They're two different things. And the bottom line about this is that what we've discovered in astronomy is that 95% of the universe is in the form of dark matter and dark energy. That is to say, it's in the form of some kind, I can't even call it a substance, but I'll call it a stuff. We don't know really what it is, but it's 90. Now listen to this. 95% of the universe is made of stuff that we cannot see, even with our best instruments, even with, the Hubble telescope, we can't see it. So what am I saying to you? I'm saying that when you look up at night at the stars, you're only seeing 5% of what's actually there.
Right.
When we look at the universe with our biggest, strongest, baddest, biggest telescopes, we're only able to see 5% of what it's there. So what does that mean to the motto, seeing is believing? If you stick to that motto, that you're only going to believe in things you can see, then you're dooming yourself to believing in only 5% of what's there. Because you're never going to see 95% of what's there. So what can you replace with seeing is believing? And what I discovered is that really the mantra that you should live by is not seeing is believing. That's silly. And that's going to limit your worldview to a teeny tiny worldview. You're going to be blind to most of what's out there, most of the truths and realities that's out there. You're going to walk around in life with blinkers on, worse than blinkers. What you really should be living by is the motto, believing is seeing. In other words, when you believe something to be true, then you will see for yourself whether it's true or not. So I give this example. Suppose you say to me, well, I don't believe in modern medicine. There are people who believe that, right? They stay away. Right. They don't believe in modern medicine. Well, what if you come down with cancer and you insist, no, I don't believe in modern medicine. No, so forget it. I'm not going to do it. Well, again, you've doomed yourself, right? Because what I say to you is, okay, unless you allow yourself, even if it's just temporarily, open your mind to the possibility that modern medicine has something to offer to you, unless you're willing to open your mind, even if it's momentarily, to believe in modern medicine, at least enough to explore it, you're never going to know whether modern medicine can help you with your cancer or not.
Right.
So you understand?
Right.
So when it comes to the statement, God exists, you might say, well, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Well, why don't I just don't believe it. I don't buy it. All right. Well, then you will never know for yourself whether he does or not. If you don't allow yourself, at least for the moment, to believe that he exists long enough for you to do your research, long enough for you to do your homework, then you are never going to find out for yourself. You're never going to see for yourself whether God exists or not. So believing is seeing. If you're not willing to believe, you're never going to be able to see whether it's true or not.
But that's so good. Okay. Can I ask one more? And then I promise I'm going to let you go.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I think a lot of the number one thing I get is creation.
Yep.
And I'm sure you've gotten that one a billion times.
Yep.
The Earth's age, evolution, that whole package. How would you unpack that with a science plus God setting? I love what you talked about the time to being relative in one of your podcasts.
Okay. So it's a great question. And because I do get it all the time, whether I'm on campus or with these podcasts or when I'm on TV or whatever, I finally decided to do a full 3-part journey on the subject of origins. So where did the universe come from? Where did life on Earth come from? And where did the human species come from? Where did you and I come from? And it's going to actually begin, I think, in about 3 weeks. Okay,
awesome.
So it's going to begin, I think, like in the middle to late March. So look for it, okay?
Okay.
But in the meantime, this whole issue of time is really important. And there's just so much heat over it. And it's all unnecessary. And journey number 13 is the one that I would recommend your listener to go to. Okay, journey number 13, lucky number 13. All right. So, but here is the message in a nutshell. You read Genesis 1, and there are some people. You look at the word yom, which is ancient Hebrew for either a 24-hour day or any length of time. It allows for either interpretation. And there are very sincere, intelligent Christians who argue passionately for each meaning. Some people insist, no, if you look at the context where it talks about the day and the evening, or the evening and the morning and all this sort of thing, it's clearly a 24-hour day. And others say, no, Yom can still mean any period of time. It's a silly argument.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a silly argument. That's what I want to explain to your listener right now. Why is it a silly argument, Dr. G? For the following reason. Truth is not time is not an absolute truth. Okay, I'm going to say that again. It's a silly argument because time is not an absolute truth. When you're dealing with an absolute truth, there is an absolute right and there's an absolute wrong. Okay. But when you're dealing with a relative truth, like time is a relative truth, then allows for people who disagree to be correct all at the same time. So, for example,
this is good. Okay.
Yeah, and so you might say to me, but wait a minute, Dr. G, who says that time is relative? Well, both science and the Bible. Is that good enough for you? First of all, science. Einstein explained in his theory of special relativity in 1905, when it was first published, he explained in that publication why time was relative. Because up until then, we believed we believed in Newtonian physics, and a cornerstone of Newtonian physics was that time was absolute. That no matter where you were in the universe, no matter who you were in the universe, we all reckoned time at the same time. We all basically wore the same Rolex. And we were all our clocks were synchronized. Okay. So there was no disagreement when it came to time. That was the old view in physics, the Newtonian view. Einstein's special theory of relativity was so revolutionary because, among other things, it opened our eyes to well, it was only an idea now, but we now have enormous evidence for it, that time is not absolute. Time is relative. It is a relative truth. By the way, along with energy, matter, and space. Those four things, space and time, matter and energy, are all relative truths. So you should not, keep that in mind. Now, Bible in 2 Peter also says that, don't forget, my friends, that a day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is like a day. So there, even in the Bible, is a statement that time is relative. It is not an absolute truth, okay? So what? Well, so this, when you're dealing with a relative truth, you can say, Dr. G, creation happened in 6 24-hour days. You could say, Dr. G, creation happened in 6 microseconds. You could say, Dr. G, it happened in 6 billion years. And guess what? You will all be correct at the same time. There is no absolute right. It is wild. It is. Like this. And unless you spend time understanding what it means for time to be relative, it is very puzzling. So I expect that your listener right now is like, whoa, what? Please think about it. Listen to the journey. Send me a question if you have. But here's the thing. It depends on your reference frame. I can pick a reference frame where it did happen in 6 24-hour days. I can pick a reference frame where it did happen in 6 microseconds. I can pick a reference frame where it did happen in 6 billion years. So it is a silly argument. You're spinning your wheels over nothing. Yeah. You are all correct. Okay? Pick absolute truths. Go to bat for absolute truths.
That's great.
Where there is an absolute right and wrong. But for goodness sake, don't allow yourself to get suckered into any kind of argument that involves time, space, matter, or energy. Okay?
Okay, this is so good.
And for goodness sake, closing thought, don't stake your faith. Please, for goodness sake, because of this, don't stake your faith on these silly arguments. Don't stake your faith in science or in the Bible over this. It would be a huge mistake because time is not an absolute truth. It is a relative truth. So you can be all right at the same time. There is no argument. It is a silly argument. It is a make-believe argument.
Literally. Oh man, Dr. G, this has been so good. I am just so thrilled. I mean, I could literally talk to you for like 4 more hours. Maybe you'll come back when your book's released and do a part 2.
I'd love to. Yeah, I have a new book coming out in the fall called Believing is Seen, and I really would look forward to coming back. I just enjoyed this so much. But again, I want to thank you, Jamie, for being the pastor that you are. Number one, that you care enough about your flock that you would do this podcast, because it's a lot of work. I know it. I know what it takes to do a podcast. It's a lot. It's not easy. So number one, thank you for taking the time to do this. And number two, thank you for understanding that science is not the enemy of the church. And if the church would just wake up, please, they would find in science a powerful ally that they could use to bring kids back into the church. Because right now, their ignorance and their avoidance of the issue is keeping millions of kids outside the church, and it breaks my heart. So thank you for all those reasons, and I'll be back anytime you want.
Oh, thanks for helping my journey along as well. I love your love for science and God and how you found that plus sign between them. It's so cool. And just thanks for all you're doing. Honor you. Keep on the journey. And I'll be right there listening.
Thank you. I will. And my love to all your listeners, and God bless each and every one of you.